get asked all the time by clients, should I hire someone as an independent contractor or should I hire them as an employee? So I figured I'd do a quick video on this to give you the rundown on some of the pros and cons for each and what you need to look out for. So let's start with first, employees. So employees, the downside for the business is one, you have more paperwork because you have to do monthly payroll or bi-weekly payroll. And then at the end of the year, you have to file W-2s. And throughout the year, you're filing payroll tax reports, typically quarterly, to pay the taxes for those employees. You have to do two things with that. You have to withhold the taxes that the employee will potentially owe, and that could include federal tax withholding, and it could also include state tax withholding if there's a state income tax for individuals in the particular state that they are performing services. Additionally, you have to pay and withhold the self-employment taxes or the FICA and Medicare portion. So that's 7.65 that the employer is responsible for paying for an employee, and it's 7.65 that you have to withhold that the employee is responsible for paying. So as you can tell, you have the additional compliance costs for doing that and hiring out the company that is actually going to do that for you. Plus you have the additional FICA and Medicare tax that you have to pay on behalf of the employee. Now, an independent contractor is different because as long as you get a W-9 from them showing what their tax status is, that they are a US resident or citizen, then you don't have to do any federal withholding. Additionally, you don't have to pay any of the FICA or Medicare. That's the responsibility of the independent contractor. So they could potentially owe 15.3%, which is the employer portion of 7.65 plus the employee portion of 7.65, and that is a cost savings to the employer. Of course, some independent contractors may realize this and you may end up paying them a higher wage for the services that they are providing, but that's not always the case. It may seem obvious that a lot of times an employer would prefer to have independent contractors because the costs are much lower for the employer in that case. However, you can't simply just decide whether you want an employee or an independent contractor without looking at all the facts. So the IRS says that if you exercise enough control over an individual and how they perform their work, then you have to classify them as an employee. If you don't, then you could classify them as an independent contractor. There are many factors that you can look at to make this determination. One of them could be, does this person perform services for other businesses? If you're just one client of theirs, then that means that they're more likely to be an independent contractor. Also, does this person provide their own tools and equipment, or are you providing that for them in the business? If they're providing their own tools and equipment, then they're more likely to be considered an independent contractor. There's also considerations like whether you have control over how and when they get the work done. So for instance, if you require them to be around for certain hours and you are telling them the steps on how they are going to accomplish whatever it is they are doing for you, that's more like an employee versus someone where you say, hey, I am giving you this responsibility and I need it by X date, and then that's your only involvement and they deliver whatever service or product it is to you, then that would be an independent contractor. You could also consider how permanent the relationship is. So if this is just a temporary one-off project, that's more likely to be an independent contractor. You'd also want to consider what other benefits that you may be providing to them. For instance, are you providing health insurance, vacation time, etc.? Then that would be more indicative of an employee and employer relationship. You'll also want to consider how important the worker's duties are to the ongoing functions of the business. If it's less important and the business could go on without them and they could use other individuals for those services, then it's less likely that that person will be considered an employee. Now, you can't just look at one of these factors and say, okay, because of this factor, they're an independent contractor. You really have to weigh all of them, consider them in totality, and determine which classification makes more sense, because this is an area that the IRS does audit frequently. Now, of course, planning ahead, you can modify the arrangement so that you can support the classification that you would prefer for your business. So I hope this helps, and I'll see you in the next video.